The views and opinions discussed on this show are of the guests and host. They do not reflect the views or opinions of associated sponsors or affiliates. Sudden alteration in belief systems, moodiness, and confusion are natural side effects of listening to this podcast. Enjoy at your own risk.
It's the Oddtonewfoundland. Ghostly greetings from your host, Jonathan. Mysteries, ghosts, monsters, and lore. East Coast esoterica and so much more. If it's odd to you, friend, it's on the Oddtonewfoundland.
Welcome back to the Oddtonewfoundland Paranormal Podcast. Before we start with tonight's guest, I really want to talk about our sponsor. Are you having a near-death experience with your audio? Are things just not working out or connecting? Are you really struggling to sound, well, like you're in a studio, but you can't really go to a studio? Guys, our sponsors, Accusonus, they've been by our side now for many years, making me sound so much better and smarter than I truly am. And I'm so grateful that they continue to sponsor this show. And rightfully so. They've got the easiest way to edit audio ever. You know, I kind of talk about some of the plugins they have. One of the main plugins I have that I really, really like is their ability to take echo out of a room. Let's say you got an audio file and it's a bit echoey. Maybe you're playing the drums and you maybe went a little bit too crazy, like Animal from the Muppets. You're a little bit too echoey. This will actually remove it with a simple turn of a knob. And the best thing about Accusonus is that not only is it simple, but it works with anything you already have. If you got GarageBand, Audacity, pretty much anything out there, it will work with. Guys, check them out in the show notes. Accusonus, thank you so much for sponsoring the show. And we'll continue on with our guest. Our guest is a very interesting one, and I gotta admit, I got selfish reasons for having him on the show, because I've had my own near-death experience, as you guys already know, in the last couple of years. He's the vice president and founder of Forever Family Foundation, which you guys can visit at www.foreverfamilyfoundation.org. He also has a blog called www.beyondthefivesenses.com. He's been featured in the Surviving Death docuseries on Netflix. He's also the author of two great books, The Medium Explosion and My Life Here and There. I'll be sure to make sure those connections are made, so to speak, in the show notes for all you guys. I'm so happy to have Robert Ginsberg on my show tonight. Robert, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I tell you, I got to catch my breath after all that. That was awesome.
Yeah, I know. It was a lot.
It is a lot, but you know what? I love it. I got to give credit where credit is due, and you've got some really interesting work there. I mean, all you had to do was almost die to really appreciate it, right? So here we are.
Yeah.
We're talking near-death experiences, but before we get into that, I got to know a little bit about who you are and where you're from and what's going on. Who exactly is Robert Ginsberg, and how did this all come about is my favorite question to ask.
Well, actually, if we were to have this conversation 22 years ago, it would be quite different, because I was a typical left-brain thinker. I didn't believe in life after death. I was unaware of all the things that we talk about, mediums and near-death experiences and the life experiences, reincarnation. I thought it was all a fantasy, like believing in Santa Claus. And then my life changed. I had a tragedy when my wife, my daughter passed, and a lot of things kept happening in terms of after-death communications and so forth. But I dismissed them, and for 7-8 years, I became intrigued, and I started traveling across the country, meeting with medical doctors and scientists that studied the mind and the brain and consciousness. And I wanted to learn if there was any credible evidence that we were indeed more than our physical bodies, and that our consciousness or our soul or our mind or whatever you choose to call it, moves on, just to a different dimension. So, eventually it took 7 or 8 years, but I came convinced by the evidence, and now I'm in a very different place than I was.
Man, what a just an absolute parallel to my own life. I could really connect there because I started paranormal investigating, about 10 years ago, and I was an atheist walking into that. I was the wet blanket telling people, no, this stuff isn't real. And then after about 7 years, I had no choice but to stop because I could no longer remain objective. I could really relate to you on that. And it's funny how it works. The most diehard, do not believe type people, they end up being believers sometimes. And, it's interesting that the path you have is similar to my own, and many other people's out there as well. It's unfortunate that such a tragedy had to befall you and your family, though, in order to experience that. I could really see your quote-unquote why as to everything you do now very, very clearly. And I appreciate your hard work, Robert. I really do.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Tell me a little tiny bit about the Forever Family Foundation and what exactly is it about? Like, what is the purpose of this? I believe you're trying to kind of meet science and spirituality together. Yes.
Exactly. So we're I like to say we're a science-based organization, and on our, we have a scientific advisory board, made up of all MDs and PhDs, and we have an academic advisory board, and yet we also have a medium advisory board, so it's kind of unusual. And what we want to do, we're not looking to convince anybody. We just want to open minds by presenting the evidence that's out there. That's why I was happy with the Netflix series, because although there were some parts of it I didn't, quite enjoy, the rest of it was good, and it opened minds to possibilities just to think. And also, people like myself that are baby boomers that are now aging are starting to question their own mortality. Is it possible that they survived the physical death? There's usually a progression. I find that there are a lot of people, if you ask them if they believe in an afterlife, they'll say yes, but what they're really saying is that they hope there's an afterlife. Maybe their religion tells them so, or the media or cultural influences, but they never really saw any evidence. And sometimes that hope turns into belief. And then if you have some sort of a profound experience like you did, like a near-death experience, or you're just simply totally convinced by the evidence, that belief can move to a knowing where you don't question anymore.
Absolutely. And, that was such a beautiful, I hate to interrupt, Robert, that was so beautiful what you said just then. You pretty much just encapsulated faith. Like, nobody really has faith until they've had an experience. Everyone is usually when it comes to religion in particular, people are mostly scholars on the issue. Read your good book. But until you have a confrontation, until something actually happens, man, I don't really believe you can be a believer. I really don't. And that was just I hate to interrupt you, but that was such a beautiful way you worded that. It was so perfect. You had a profound experience, and now you understand there's more than what's before you. And I'm telling you right now, after my own, I already had that belief anyway as a paranormal investigator. I had it already. I know there's something there. So when I had my NDE, it just kind of reaffirmed the shortness of your life here. Like, there's definitely a feeling of urgency to do the things that I need to do while my time on this earth is still available. And, it's part of the grieving process for sure. How do you guys help others when it comes to bereavement?
Well, we as a matter of fact, I just got back. We had our grief retreat. We have 4 grief retreats per year in different parts of the United States. And what we do with these retreats is we have mediums that have been certified by our foundation. I could tell you what that's about. But, we have grief professionals. We have metaphysical practitioners. I usually like to get somebody who had a near-death experience, because I think that perspective is very important. And what we notice is that there's a dramatic difference in the people when they walk in on Friday, and a lot of people have such heavy grief and they can't smile and they barely want to talk. And by the time we leave on Sunday night, there's a lightness and, some renewed hope and meaning, and that's wonderful. So basically what we do is we just provide information, and we hope that people will share experiences they have. I mean, a lot of people have dream visitations, or they have synchronicities or after death communications, but they keep it to themselves. They have a fear that they're going to be labeled or judged, and if you present them with a safe environment where people are open to such discussion, it's amazing. So as more and more people begin to share their experiences with others, that the mainstream thought will change, and we can possibly change the way that we think about death.
Absolutely. I had this, even though I had a little bit of like we talk about the mustard seed of faith, where it's, I think there's something to it, but we really don't know. Until I had my own NDE, it was like, there's no doubt in my mind that, there was something, but now it almost like pulled the curtain back, pulled the veil back, so to speak, just a little bit, and just how vibrant and beautiful things are, over there. So when I say over there, I mean the other side. So let's talk a little tiny bit about that. You talk about, basically all these mediums who you kind of vetted yourself, which I think is an awesome thing, because most people just jump on the first medium they see. If they have a great experience, wonderful. If they have a bad one, they're usually turned off. Tell me a little tiny bit about, that grief transformation and that nature there. Like, there's definitely more to meets the eye. It's a special kind of medium, I think, that you guys have. In a nutshell is what I'm trying to say. Sounds like a very special person has to be there for that.
The first thing that I noticed when I started doing this work is that there were a lot of mediums that simply weren't any good.
Yeah.
In my Medium Explosion book, I stated that 85 to 90% of the practicing mediums today can't do what they claim. And that was based upon my own research, and everything else that I've observed and encountered. Now, that didn't make me very popular with the medium community, but I didn't write the book to discredit mediums. I just wanted to show that there are 10 to 15% of mediums that are truly gifted and have that ability. And if somebody gets a really evidential, specific, medium reading, it could totally change their grief, can transform it. It's very powerful. But on the other hand, especially if you're on the fence about whether there's an afterlife and you go to a medium and you get a crappy reading, which is, general bullshit, it has the opposite effect. You walk away from there saying, oh, this is just baloney, and, there's no such thing. So mediums they have a great responsibility. So what we started doing is, I had the help of several scientists that study mediumship at various universities, and they helped me design my own evaluation process. And we've been doing it since 2005. So that's 19 years. And in 19 years, I think we've certified 27 or 28 mediums. That's just over one medium per year. So, if we evaluate 10 mediums, maybe one will pass. So and nobody's going to pass our process without being, an extremely good evidential medium. So, it's important work. And, people need a reliable resource to turn. Mediumship, they're not mental health professionals, but they're sitting with people in grief. And there's no certification process. There's no licensing. There's no oversight. There's no continuing education. So, you can open up, and here in this country, you could just put up a sign on your house saying, I'm Johnny the Medium, and start charging people, and
times are tough. Times are tough here in Canada. I'm contemplating it, man. I really am.
Well, you can do it. If nothing else, you can give some insight into what the afterlife is.
I'm telling you right now, though, I can really relate to you because when it comes to vetting people, because I'll say what I am. I'm an electronic voice phenomena researcher. It's what I did for 7 years here. All field research, going to the haunted locations, doing like 4 or 5 investigations a week at the same location, trying to get that repeatable data. Everyone said, man, this is so boring. We don't want anything to do with this. I'm like, no, this is the real deal. This is how you try to make it as scientific as possible, get that repeatable data, prove to people that there really is something to electronic voice phenomena. And I can really relate to you because I know that a lot of what I see online is gobbledygook, much like the bad mediums, right? So it's, I can definitely relate. But I got to pick your brain on electronic voice phenomena now. I owe it to myself. I got to say it because I noticed it on your website. I was like, oh, well, we got something we can talk about here. What is your experience with electronic voice phenomena? Now, for anybody out there who is not aware of that, that is voices basically caught on recorder somehow, whether it's through, instrumentation or actual just recorded by itself that should not be there. Like we're thinking these are the ghost's voice or spirit's voice or whatever you want to call it. What is your take on that? Is there any NDEs you can relate to it or anything like that? I'm just really curious.
Well, what's intriguing about EVP, electronic voice phenomena, is that you can get evidence using your own 5 senses. You could hear the recording. That's, you didn't read about it in the book. It just happens. So, and as you mentioned, you simply turn on a recorder, and sometimes people can try it for years and not get anything.
That's right. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that they do. I also think that certain people are acting as mediums when they try to collect EVPs because some people seem to get it on a regular basis and some don't. I'll tell you an interesting story. My wife passed 3 years ago, and after she passed, there's one of our certified mediums that, as a hobby, had dabbles in EVP research. And she was quite friendly with my wife. And she called me up and she said, Bob, would you mind that I do weekly sessions with EVP? And I'd like to pose 7 questions to Fran, my wife in spirit, and see what we get. And I'll send you the audio files. And some of the files, as you alluded to, or some of the voice recordings are not intelligible. So they have very little evidentiary weight, but others are very clear. I used to take EVPs, and we used to run these afterlife discussion groups, and I used to play it for people in the group. A lot of people make the argument that it's just our own minds trying to make sense of nothing. There's a term, pareidolia, where our brains are hardwired to make sense out of, things that appear to be incoherent. But if I play the recording and there are 10 people in the room and I ask people to independently write down what they heard, and if all 10 heard the same thing,
right,
it's hard to argue that it's just, everybody's brain can't work exactly the same way.
You'd love to go. You'd love to go something with me.
Yeah, well,
I literally did that with 10 people in real time, and was like, "Okay, guys, what do you hear?"
Yeah.
And
so what's interesting is that this medium, she sends me a recording, and she said to my wife, "What is the name of the organization that you founded?" And you hear, faintly but clearly, Forever Family Foundation. And then another time, it happened to be my birthday, and the message, the question was, "Do you have a message for Bob?" And then I heard, "Happy birthday."
Oh.
So I had personal, evidence, which of course made me feel great because I heard it, So I think that EVP is really significant. And as you mentioned, we don't really know the process by which they can imprint their voices. But what's interesting is that the voices are never heard live while they happen. They only appear on playback, and I don't know the reason for that, but just a fact.
I think there's rules. I think, I honestly think there's rules to this. I think there's rules over there, and I think they have to follow them. They cannot interfere with the living to the point where we are 100% convinced that there's an afterlife, because then we would not live by faith. I really do think that's the issue. I think, you're absolutely right. It very rarely is in real time. You might feel something in real time, but very rarely do you hear it. Some of the greatest EVPs I have ever captured were answers to questions that were open-ended with multiple words. They're audible to the ear. they're intelligently communicated, and they're in direct response to my question. They're in direct response to a stimulus sometimes in the environment. Like, I'm telling you, like, there's really something to that. And I really got stuck on EVP, like to the point where everything else just disappeared. I'm like, I got to prove this is the real deal. And I had enough. After 6 or 7 years, I was like, man, like, I can't go any farther than this. It got to the point where I started mapping out where this stuff was coming from in a room. I was putting recorders on a ceiling with a grid pattern, trying to capture the EVPs. Remember, repeatable data in the same room, 3 years. Like, I really did my homework on this. And I can show you that this is an emergent phenomena, that it's actually coming from a small area in a room. It's not necessarily coming from the person either, right? It's interesting too, like, I really do believe that if you're open to this stuff, it's going to start happening to you anyway. It's like, do you ever meet someone like right away and you're like, oh yeah, this person, yeah, they're involved with this stuff very heavily. Just by talking to them for like 5 minutes. And then once you you realize like they're pretty much a magnet for this stuff. Why do you think so many people have that paranormal, so to speak, magnetism about them? Do you think there's a reason for that? Are they a beacon to the other side? What's going on there?
I mean, it's a good question, and I wish I had an answer, but I don't. Just why do some people, like mediums, get information and others don't? Why do people get all sorts of after-death communications and signs, and others don't? We hear that all the time. There appears to be some sort of, with some people, a resonance. I mean, people talk about frequency, and then they run the same frequency as the person in spirit is able to lower their frequency, and the person in the physical world is able to raise their vibrations and frequency, and there's a match that hits. It's that sometimes even in a mediumship reading, there has to be some sort of a resonance between the person in spirit, the sitter, the person getting the reading, and the medium. And if that's out of whack, it doesn't occur. And the same thing maybe with EVP. I don't know why some people are more receptive than others. When you find out, let me know.
I did my best, and all I could do was tell you that it's an emergent phenomena. It's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And someday it will no longer be pseudoscience. I really do feel once the military finds a way to make money off this and kill people with it, they'll be all about it. It'll be a science.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because in remote viewing, which I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with,
of course,
our own CIA, started the Stargate program during the Cold War with the Russians, and they found these incredible remote viewers, and they would give them just a simple latitude and longitude of strategic sites, and they would ask the remote viewer to send their consciousness and view that site and draw, make drawings of what they saw, and incredible accuracy and time, but meant nothing. So past, present, and future all came into play. I mean, I've done my own remote viewing experiments over the years, and it's quite incredible, because it shows that our consciousness, our mind, can extend beyond the physical brain. And if that happens, then belief in life after death is not so far-fetched. It's logical, because the brain is no more, the receiver is damaged, but the signal, still goes on. So it's all these things that we're talking about are interrelated. There's a common denominator that we need to discover that allows all these things to occur.
A journey that transcends time and space, indeed. My life here and there. What a read this is going to be. I can't wait to get it on my Kindle. Okay, I'm going to check this out for sure, and only because I can relate to you so much in my own journey. And one of the interesting things you had in the little spiel about the book actually is the prospect of an afterlife has been pondered since the dawn of man. It's one of the great mysteries of life, but there is clarity if one digs deep. I mean, you might as well put that on a tattoo and put it on my forehead. And it really goes back to this idea too. Like, there's no such thing as a coincidence. Like, you're thinking about someone and suddenly they call you on the phone. You're out in traffic. and you realized that you had to stop and pet your cat for 30 seconds in your driveway before you left, and then you see the accident up ahead of you. If you had been 30 seconds, a little bit earlier, so to speak, you would have been one hit. There's no such thing as a coincidence, I really don't think. Do you really feel like we all have a path that's kind of laid out for us somewhere? Or do you feel like we're more kind of like the ocean, everyone's just kind of floating around?
Well, I have my own theory on that, and I differ from many of my colleagues, and certainly a lot of people in the spiritual communities, that I don't believe that our lives are planned. I believe that this physical existence is random, but it's random by design of a greater design. It sounds like a contradiction in terms, but I think that this one little blip in a continuum of life is designed so that things just happen. And it's how we react to these obstacles and things that occur that helps us when we move on. So I do think that there are, coincidences, but many things that happen, as you alluded to, are not, the coincidence, the synchronistic things that come together. You can say by the universe, you can say by a designer, but clearly they happen. And like you said, people make decisions, sometimes very, very simple, seemingly meaningless decisions, and they can reverberate throughout the universe and change the course of events. So I think that our futures are not planned. I think there may, like a tree, there may be many different pathways and branches that you could take. So I caution people not to make life decisions based upon psychic information, because free will dominates and can change that, and you take another fork in the road. So it is complicated, and I think that certainly psychic intuition and ESP and telepathy are used by us in various degrees by all people every day. Who knows where our thoughts come from? Our thoughts may not, most thoughts, if you talk to great artists and inventors and poets and writers over time, they'll tell you that it came to them in dreams, the ideas, or some idea popped in their head. Are those ideas generated by electrochemical synapses that fire in our brain, or are our brain's receivers of information from the universe? These are deep questions.
We've only got a few minutes left. We've talked at length. Yeah. This has been a wonderful interview, but I got to ask the most compelling question for all the listeners out there. And I try to ask this of anybody who has truly been on a digging deep, so to speak, journey. What is the most compelling data / evidence you have that there really is an afterlife? What is the most compelling thing you've seen yourself?
All right. I'll preface that by saying that I can make an argument against all these forms of evidence and research, but when you step back and examine the data on a whole, the explanation of survival of death makes the most sense. What personally I think is the most compelling evidence is from near-death experiences, because you have people that, I don't have to tell you, but they meet every definition of death. They have no heartbeat, they have no respiration, they have no brain waves, they have no reflexes. Medical science says they're dead. And yet they come back with describing experiences that were realer than real. And in many things, such as leaving their body, their mind, their consciousness leaves their body. They could view their body. Many times they're in an operating room, see what's going on. There are cases of people that have been blind, sightless since birth, and yet they come back and describe all the colors and all the equipment and everything that went on in the room. And they describe clear and logical thinking. How is that possible when your mind, when your brain is compromised or dead for all purposes? I think that to me remains the most compelling form of evidence And that's why it's important for people like you to talk about these things, so, to let people know.
Absolutely. Guys, awesome. A great example. The floating above the body type thing. And, we've heard that story from a lot of people. It's funny. We talk about repeatable data in science, and yet here we are. How many people have said they've had that happen to them and that they can see what people are doing in the room? It just blows my mind. Guys, his name is Robert Ginsberg. He's the vice president founder of Forever Family Foundation. You guys can check that out at www.foreverfamilyfoundation.org. His blog is www.beyondthefivesenses.com, which I think is such a cool name. He's been featured in the Surviving Death docuseries on Netflix. Okay, you guys should check that out. And he's the author of The Medium Explosion, as well as My Life Here and There. Guys, check him out. All those links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on, Robert. Really appreciate it. Thank you for opening my mind even wider than what it was before about the afterlife.
Thank you, Johnny. It was my pleasure to be with you.
Attention all Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn radio listeners. The Oddtonewfoundland Paranormal Podcast brings you the best in East Coast esoterica on the first of every month. Together, we can keep it growing by sharing the show on social media, subscribing to the show wherever you may be listening to it from, and by leaving feedback about your favorite episodes. John certainly needs a friend like you to help make his dreams come true, minus the alien abduction dreams. That is not cool at all. The Oddtonewfoundland Paranormal Podcast, always available, always free, always odd.